Welcome to For the Record. I'm Michelle Wright, and today I continue our exploration into the Kecksburg UFO mystery. This past Tuesday, December 9th, marks 60 years since the night witnesses say they saw something in the sky, and others claim they saw it make a controlled landing in Kecksburg. And of course, there are also multiple accounts that the military responded to the incident. For part 2 of this For the Record series, I decided to speak with Bob Gatty, a former Greensburg Tribune-Review reporter who was on the scene that night and says that story has followed him for the last 60 years. Take a look. Can you believe it's been 60 years since whatever happened in Kecksburg happened?
That's really incredible. It really is. But if you take a look at me, the way I look today compared to the way I looked then, you can tell that it's been 60 years.
You and me both, right? Well, let's go back to that night in December 9th in Kecksburg. Tell me what you were doing and just anything that you can add. I want to know all about it.
All right. Well, I was working for the Greensburg Tribune Review. I was brand new. I was just, I don't know, in my early 20s. And I was a general assignment reporter, and I had been out covering, I don't know, a school board meeting or a township commissioners meeting or whatever it was. And I came back into the newsroom, and the editor came over to me, put his arm around my shoulder, and said, "Hey, Bob, I have the story of the century for you."
So wait, he knew right then it was the story of the century that night.
Well, that's what he said. And okay, so I'm going like, oh, he's sending me on a snipe hunt. Do you know what a snipe hunt is? I I figured that he was sending me out on a wild goose chase because I was, new. Uh, but anyway, I got in my car. I drove out to Kecksburg where he told me to go, and lo and behold, there were hundreds of people along this dirt road, and there was a whole bunch of military there. I don't know whether they were Army. I think they were Army, but I'm not positive. Anyhow, they had guns and they were kind of guarding this field. And so I pulled up, and the first guy, the first, I don't know, official looking guy that was there, I said, "Hey, I'm with the Trib. I need to go back in there and see what's going on." He said, "You can't." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, there's nothing there." I said, "Well, what's all those lights? People down there, what's going on?" He said, "Well, I can't tell you, but there's nothing there." Well, that made no sense to me. So I said, "Well, what happens if I do that?" He said, "Well, you get arrested." Hmm. So anyway, I walked around and I talked to a whole bunch of people, observers, asking them what they had seen. Excuse me, what they had seen, and I got stories from people who said that they saw a light come down from the sky. They saw something went through a bunch of trees, broke off some trees. Um, and then later, after I left, I went back to the newsroom and wrote my story, such as I had, which was not much. Basically, it was the story was that they denied anything had happened, but clearly something had happened, and there were all these people who were witnesses, um, sort of. Nobody really had seen an object come down and land. Nobody had really seen that, not anyone that I could talk to. But later, I talked with people on the phone, and I got stories about a flatbed truck being pulled out of there with some kind of an object on the back covered with a big tarp. Um, and so, at any rate, I wrote a follow up story about it, and that was pretty much it. And I thought that was the end of the story, but no. I'm 82 years old, and that thing has followed me my whole life. It's the story that won't go away.
What do you think it was?
Hard to tell, but I do believe that I do believe something happened. I do believe something landed there. I do believe that they pulled something out on a flatbed truck, covered it up so people couldn't see it. And following the reports that have come out in recent years over time, it's clear to me that they covered something up. I just don't know what. I have no way to know, but I don't believe their story that nothing happened. I don't believe that at all.
What do you think the motivation was for them to tell you nothing happened?
I think it. Well, first of all, the military is super secret anyway. That's just how they are. My dad was in the military, and I saw that with my own eyes growing up. I never served myself, although I tried. Um, and but I feel like it's in the nature of the military to be secretive that way. That's one thing. But the other thing is, I think that maybe the motivation was concern, fear that people would be afraid, upset. Um, Not sure about that. Um, there's been a lot of discussion. Oh, maybe it was something from Russia. Maybe it was a some kind of a missile that got loose from the missile site that was not far from there. The Irwin, Pennsylvania Nike missile site was. I don't know if it's still there, but my father served there, and it's possible that maybe there was a connection of some way. I have no way to know that.
How was the attitude of the people who were there at that night? It seemed like as people are recounting what they remember, there was a lot of excitement. They were shuffling around trying to find out what was going on. How was it from your perspective?
Yeah, people were excited, talking to each other. Everybody was trying to figure out, compare notes, what people had seen, and so on. Um, the scariest thing to me was all those military there. Why were there dozens, if not more, soldiers with guns um, lining that field and keeping people from going down into that area where there were some lights I could see. There was, it looked like a truck. Um, they were people doing something. It was too far away. It was probably, I don't know, 300 yards away from where I was. And it was dark, so I couldn't tell really what was going on. But people were curious about that, obviously, and wanted to know, what's going on in our backyard? What's going on?
Do you
Funny thing
find it
is that
fascinating
Kecksburg.
that, what'd you say?
I was just saying, the funny thing is that Kecksburg Fire Department, which was kind of like a holding area, the fire hall there was kind of like a holding area for people and for the, I guess, for the military. Um, and I used the phone there. I went back and, we didn't have cell phones back in those days. And I had to go, yeah, really. I had to I had to borrow a phone, so I ran into the fire hall there and bummed the phone so I could call my story in. Um, and so that was exciting. But in recent years, they've had these annual Kecksburg UFO festivals. And I went to one a few years ago, and it was a riot. Oh, it was a riot. Absolute riot.
Can you believe here it is 60 years later, and with everything that's been released, with all these different old cases, we still don't know the answer to what happened?
I know. That's amazing. And a lot of pretty good reporters have been on the story for a long time, trying to uncover it. So either the military is right and nothing really happened, which I do not believe, or they've done a hell of a job of covering everything up. That's what I believe.
Still ahead on For the Record.
But people swear that they saw some very short little humanoid creatures running around this area not far from the crash site during that evening.
A new account of what happened in Kecksburg 60 years ago. Welcome back to For the Record. You'll remember last week I spoke with UFO researcher, author, and documentarian Stan Gordon as we discussed the Kecksburg UFO mystery. This week, I wanted to share more from that conversation, including what he says is new information about what happened on December 9th, 1965. Tell me the new information that you have just released. So this is the 60th anniversary, and you want to point to something that's little known. Talk about that.
Well, a couple of things are interesting. A lot of people didn't know at the time, and it took me years and years to have independent sources that brought these things up. One of the things was that I have information from witnesses from Ohio into Pennsylvania, including this area, who said they saw one or possibly two military jets pursuing along the path the object had taken just a short time before. So there was at least two military aircraft. And then a fascinating new detail I got from a witness that contacted me from Michigan last year. The person told me that he was up in age, his health was not real good. He wanted to give me this information while he still could. And he was able to confirm with me certain details that I could confirm it was the day it happened, December 9th. And he was an aviation buff, he knew aircraft. And just to make the story short, he was on a date at a drive-in restaurant outside of Pontiac, Michigan. It was just getting dark, which is the right time. It was about dusk here and up in that area. And he sees this large dark object with flames around it moving across the sky. But he said what really impressed him moments later was there was an F-101 Voodoo fighter jet that approached right behind the object and fired a missile at it. And apparently the whole area lit up really bright, illuminated, the cars all around there, and the object kept going, and the jet moved out of sight, and that's a fascinating kind of new detail. And but it fits in with the other reports I have that people saw military jets, something that was not known. There's so much information out there, and that's just one example.
Well, after researching this for 60 years, you were still interviewing people about what they saw that night.
On occasion, I still get some leads. This past year at the Kecksburg Festival, I had probably 3 or 4 seniors my age that came up to me and said, I remember that night I was out there with my parents. I was a young child at the time, but I remember seeing the Army. I saw the flatbed truck with a tarp object on it. It's so common to a lot of these people, they don't even think much about it anymore. Very unfortunately, so many really good witnesses, people who had really good detailed accounts, have passed away, and that's unfortunate.
Do you think we'll ever know what it was?
Well, now we know that the government's very interested in UFOs. UFOs, they call UAP now, it's actually now considered unidentified anomalous phenomena. And anyhow, at least they're taking some serious attention to these reports now. Federal agencies from the FAA to the FBI are now investigating UFO sightings. And you have congressional hearings on this. People in Congress are taking this very seriously. They're trying to get files open themselves. And now we're seeing major motion pictures coming out, talking with government whistleblowers who are talking about UFO crashes, that they had information. There's been a long-term UFO recovery program for many, many years, that we've recovered objects that were not man-made and even bodies. And
When you say bodies, what do you mean by that?
well, they claim that they have information that bodies of some species, not human, have been recovered from some of the crash sites. And that's why this year I decided there was some information I had on Kecksburg that I kept quiet for years and years because there wasn't not a lot of information.
Well, you have to tell us right now. What are you talking about?
It's a long story to get involved in. I can just tell you this. For example, back in 1990, when Unsolved Mysteries did their premiere story on Kecksburg, when that story broke nationally, it opened up the floodgates. I received information from multitudes of sources, locally and from throughout the country. Some of these were people that used to live in the Mount Pleasant area that have moved away. I got anonymous tips. I got people who had really good information on this from different levels. And a man called me and he said, well, I guess I'm allowed to talk to you about it now that it's been on television. And he went on to tell me that he was a truck driver from Ohio, worked for a large supply company. And this large supply company, they sent a large supply of a special type of brick to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base about 2 to 3 days after the object had fallen in Pennsylvania. There were 2 truck drivers involved. The man that called me provided a lot of information. There was a lot of investigation done in Ohio and Pennsylvania on the case. Everything he told us we were able to find and confirm. The other truck driver for quite a while didn't want to go public, but later he did talk and confirm the story as well. But anyhow, to make the story very, very brief, the first truck driver delivered the first load of bricks the day before the person who contacted me had been there with him. And that fell outside a military flatbed tractor trailer with the tarped object outside of a building. The next day, when the man who contacted me was with the other truck driver, the trailer was there, the object was gone, but the tarp was lying over it. So this gentleman told me that they were told, just do your business, don't be looking around, don't do anything. But this guy was very curious. And he kept seeing these men in these white coveralls, periodically changing outer clothing, going in and out of this building. And he believed from what he saw they were Navy personnel. And he described to me going inside and seeing this object, kind of off gold bronze, acorn-shaped object, no weld marks, no seams, odd symbols on it. It was up on scaffolding. There were ladders going up. There were men working on it. And without going into a lot of detail, once they realized he really didn't have the clearance in it, he was pretty much threatened and told, forget about everything you've seen. If we're going to throw you in jail, but in 20 years, this will all be public knowledge. And of course, that never happened. What he didn't tell me at the time, till years later, when his house was very bad, he said, I have something else to tell you. When I was inside of that building, he said the lighting was not real good. He saw it was a workbench or work table. He said there was a small body on it, covered, there was a cloth covering over it. And all I could see, he said, was a left arm hanging down and only had 3 fingers and the skin looked lizard-like. And I tried many, many times to see if he would exaggerate or change the story. He never did. And then later...
Do you believe him?
Yes, I do. And
so you believe he saw an alien?
Well, I can't say it's an alien. He saw something. But then there's other cases, there's other stories that I heard over many years from this area, from different people who didn't want to tell anybody about it, didn't want to talk about it.
Why is that?
Because one, well, a lot of people didn't even want to talk about seeing the object for years and years, alone seeing something maybe associated with this. But I can tell you, even in the last few years, I finally got some people who were willing to talk to me about what they had seen, and they refused for years and years to do it. But people swear that they saw some very short little humanoid creatures running around this area not far from the crash site during that evening. And then there's other stories that are even more involved that really give you more detail and make you wonder if there was someone or something inside of that object.
What do you think?
I can just tell you these witnesses and people I interviewed were very credible people. They weren't out there looking for publicity. It changed their lives. And a lot of people's lives were changed over what they saw even that night in '65, just seeing the object alone. But
do you believe them?
I believe they definitely saw something. And why would you make these stories up? And they're all similar. There's very, very similar accounts.
There are definitely still unanswered questions. Coming up, some final thoughts on the Kecksburg UFO mystery. Welcome back to For the Record. As we wrap up this two-part series on the Kecksburg UFO mystery, I share a final thought from Ronnie Struble, a 50-year veteran of the Kecksburg Volunteer Fire Department, who I interviewed last week about whether the truth about what happened on December 9th, 1965 will ever be revealed.
I think eventually it'll come out, but maybe not in my lifetime, maybe my kids' lifetime or my grandkids' lifetime, but I don't know in my lifetime that they're going to let it be known.
Such a mystery.
But I do believe it's interesting for me now, being involved all these years since 2005, that why would these people tell me this stuff and not be there? Like, I got local people up here on Route 31 that their wife was here. They seen it. They seen the streak in the sky. So something happened.
Something happened right over here.
Right down there.
Keep it here. There's more For the Record in just 2 minutes. Welcome back to For the Record. Remember, if you have a topic you'd like us to address, send us an email to news@wtae.com. You can also rewatch this episode or any episode with the Very Local app on your smartphone, tablet, or smart TV. Thank you for joining us. Have a good week.